Now, Relik, from a military perspective, I want to bring you into this discussion. Who's really the big winner of this 2 week pause in fighting, militarily speaking, obviously? Everyone sort of gets this chance to, regroup and rearm. But are the regime even in a position to regroup and rearm if they don't have that proper leadership, as we discussed? What's your take on that?
We're at about the halftime mark, so it's difficult at this time to call the shots and say who's going to be in control. It is quite clear that if the United States is persistent in its policies, then we're going to face a different type of a feud. And I would guess that we wouldn't go back to the previous type of engagement, but rather that the U.S. will try to clear the Hormuz straits and actually take over the straits by clearing the mines and maybe provocating the Iranians to shoot at American warships so that they can target those who shoot, whether they be drones or missiles or radars that may still be there, or maybe even strong arm into darkening, let's say, Tehran by hitting some power plants as examples of what is to follow. So I would reckon to say that the U.S. will not go into full scale, but rather I would say what we call low intensity conflict, LIC, by which you put enough pressure on the other side that will change their position without going into full scale. And the Iranians can try and hit some of their neighbors as they did before, but short of hitting Israel and getting Israel into the game. Same thing goes for southern Lebanon, where Israel will probably constrain itself into the previous type of hitting the centers of the Hezbollah, and rather than Beirut and places that would invoke public outcry. So we're still, I would say, in a break before we go back to the game, perhaps with more latitude and an interchange of diplomacy. I would call it the Kissinger approach. And this is how Henry Kissinger handled the approach at the time with the Vietnamese. And even with the October War, if you remember what he said when he wanted to pressure Israel, he said, let them bleed. And probably Mark knows about this more than I do, so that you coax the other side into your position by showing them that it's a dead end. Their way is a dead end.
Mm-hmm. So I actually want to just emphasize and ask you about what you think would happen in Israel should fighting resume, on the home front, because I'm just getting an update in recent minutes. The IDF chief of staff has just warned Israelis to prepare to go back to guidelines that simulate wartime, basically saying that given the collapse of talks and the failure of the efforts in Islamabad, that Israelis and the IDF should all be ready fully to prepare for another wave of attacks. Do you think that the Islamic regime is capable of attacking Israel before this 2 week period is over? And do you think that it would be attacks that we've seen before the negotiation efforts have begun, the frequency of the ballistic missiles, or could there actually be a reduction this time around?
There's certainly their capability is there to shoot. I think they would rather target their neighbors across the straits, because this is the main issue that they're going to deal with in the near future: who controls the Hormuz Straits. And perhaps we will get some missiles shot from Yemen, from their proxies, because they want to keep the conflict to a level that is, I would say, controllable on their side. So they wouldn't go into full scale, but obviously there's no guarantee in here, and we should be on the watch for continuation. If they shoot at us, then probably our Air Force will take off to Tehran, and they would try to prevent that by keeping a kind of a local, lower intensity conflict and put pressure on the Hormuz Straits, because if the U.S. takes over the Hormuz Straits and is able to get shipping through, then they're really done.
Ambassador, I'd like to get your comments also on what Relik is saying about the Strait of Hormuz, but also in general, if you can comment on Trump's previous threats of, wiping out an entire civilization. Do you think that was just a pressure tactic to end the war and to begin the negotiating process? Or are the real strikes on energy facilities and bridges really expected if the talks fall apart? I mean, Trump doesn't really seem so eager to be in this war. So what do you think is going through his head right now?
So, when Trump used that language, which non-Israelis wouldn't agree with that, yes, Israelis would say we want to have peace with the people of Iran. We remember a time when we had good relations with Iran, yes, and we wouldn't talk about destroying Iranian civilization the way Trump did. But to be fair to the president, he's in many ways used his language effectively, because it was the movement of the military forces, the willingness to use them, and projecting the idea that I could do this. If you don't agree to a deal, I'm going to go all out. Yes, that threat seems, from a utilitarian point of view, it seems to have been very effective, because it was only after that did the Iranians agree to these direct talks in Islamabad. Yes. And so sometimes this sort of language, the general mentioned Kissinger. Kissinger talked about the idea, with Nixon during the Vietnam War, that they wanted the North Vietnamese to believe that the Americans would go all out. And the president actually used another term from Nixon and Kissinger. He talked about bombing them back to the Stone Age, yes? So I think you have to see this sort of language by the president in the way of that he's conveying a message. Unless you agree to put severe limits on your nuclear program, there will be, all else. And so from that point of view, it was effective language, because it seems to have got this ceasefire. And the threat seems to have got Iran to a place where they haven't been before. I also agree with the general on the issue that if it is a return to firing, if we return to all-out war, it doesn't necessarily mean more of the same. And so the general spoke quite correctly about possibility of an American military effort to open up the straits, and that's quite possible. But maybe he would do something else that he hasn't done so far. He could send in surgical ground troops, special forces. He's got the 82nd Airborne in the area, which hasn't done anything yet. He's got the two Marine combat groups, one from Okinawa, I believe, the other one from California. Altogether, that's some 5,000, 6,000 elite troops. He could take over the island, the oil island, Haraj Island, yes? And then he'd really have the Iranians by the throat. Then he could really dictate to them terms, because he'd have his hands on the windpipe of the Iranian economy. And so there are many things he could do, and he has these 2 weeks to prepare what he wants to do next, on the assumption that the Iranians don't agree to the plan.
And Relik, do you agree? Do you think that there are still some unused tactics by President Trump and his administration and his military that could potentially be used should the fighting resume? Do you also think that taking out the Islamic regime's energy infrastructure is still on the table in any way, and is that even helpful at all to Israel? What do you think?
Well, one of the problems when we're talking about the Iranians is, do they understand what happened during the 40 days? Does the information flow from the lower echelons into the leaders and the decision makers on what happened to their infrastructure, to their what will happen to their economy, and what are they facing? Remembering the Shia ideology of suffering that started from the Battle of Karbala in October 680. That's quite a while ago. And the way they view their ability to withstand pressure, much like the Germans and Russians in the Second World War, And it would take something like what happened with the Iraq-Iran war that took place between 1980 and 88. In 1988, the Iranians, who numbered 30 million at the time, had lost 1 million people in the war. Tehran and Isfahan were bombed on a weekly basis by Scud missiles from Iraq, and they had to send 12-year-old kids to blow up mines in the land warfare. Their position was really dire at the time. And I think and even Arakchi and all their leaders took part. For instance, their prime minister, who's a physician, was a physician with the IRGC at the time of that war. So they all have memories of the war and how dire was their situation at the time. They're certainly not close to it by now, and I don't think we would like them to feel that way, to be in that position. But in order for them to accept a change, they need not only that they feel, and the IRGC feel, that they are in a dead-end street, but that should go down to the people, and that can be achieved by darkness in Tehran. I'm sorry to say this. So I would think that the sticks and carrots here, they need some more sticks in the in terms of darkness at night, so that they feel the pressure. And I think this was what will happen, including provocations, U.S. provocations along the Hormuz straits, to make sure that they understand that the Americans are serious in taking over the straits. So a series of, I would say, an upgraded mode of operation to make them, to convince the IRGC, who seem to control the politicians at this time, that they should agree to the terms, to the dictated terms. And I'm afraid that if we take an example from the Second World War, the Germans did not capitulate until they were really, really in the dumps.
Absolutely. And I think you make a very good point of sort of looking back at history, as you mentioned, to sort of, guide us in this current, in these current days. We are almost out of time, but I really just want to get both of your takes on everything that has to do with Lebanon. Ambassador Mark, do you think that the Lebanese sticking point, obviously Iranian officials saying that it is included in the ceasefire, Israeli officials saying that it is not, could this be what ends up causing the collapse, if not the nuclear issue being a sticking point between U.S. and Iranian negotiators? Could everything with Lebanon also come to a pause?
I don't think so. You've got to remember, before this war started, what was it now, more than 40 days ago now, that Israel was acting in Lebanon. We were enforcing what our interpretation of the ceasefire agreement, that Hezbollah wasn't allowed to be in certain areas, they weren't allowed to do certain things, and they were supposed to be disarmed. And I think that that train has already left the station on that issue, because it's clear that the talks are going on and we're still fighting in Lebanon. So I think that issue's no longer part of the talks. The big question is, yes, to what extent are the Iranians willing to give the United States what the United States needs to meet the American red lines on their nuclear program? And the question is, are the current people running Iran, are they a bunch, to use another Second World War analogy, are they a bunch of kamikazes that just want to commit suicide, yes? Or are they going to be like the emperor was and turn around and say, this is it, the game is up, we have to now make a deal that leaves our regime in power? And of course, any deal does leave the regime in power, at least for the time being.
And Relik, your thoughts on Lebanon, the operations there, and what do you think could be coming in the few days?
I like Mark's remark about the Hirohito in I think it was August 1945. Israel needs to, or wants to, cut the umbilical cord connecting Iran and Lebanon. And if it adheres to the 1701 UN decision after the 2006 war, that southern Lebanon, south of the Litani, is clear of Hezbollah, then it has not just the Israel's will, but also the UN resolution that gives Israel the right to operate so that it can push Hezbollah out. And that would be a good thing to follow, that we are just implementing the 1701 decision. This would, I think, also strike well with the Israeli Republic, especially in the north. So I don't see any stoppage of hostilities until that umbilical cord is severed one way or another.
And just quickly, Relik, do you think that security can actually and fully be restored to the north? Do you see that happening anytime soon?
Only if Iran capitulates one way or another, it actually leaves Hezbollah not only without the support of Iran, but also Israel could reach some kind of an agreement with the Syrians, who certainly have their vengeance on Hezbollah waiting to take its turn, and maybe be active at the Bekaa Valley, and Israel could give in a little bit in the Golan Heights, so that Israel may choose the idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend as a means of extending its diplomatic capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Extending that buffer zone as well. So a brief history lesson back to World War II, but also an analysis of the coming days. Ambassador Mark Regev and Relik Shafir, thank you both so much for coming on the show and giving us your insights today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.